Welcome, everybody, to the podcast. I have somebody here who I think you'll be so excited to hear about. He's super smart and super fun to listen to. Jason Hunt is a professor at BYU Idaho, and he and I have crossed paths here and there, and we serve together in our callings. Anytime he teaches and offers his expertise and wisdom in all things, I'm always all ears because I feel like he's got a good grasp on just topics, but then also real with everything that we have coming at us. He did a fireside on addiction for the youth and the parents a couple months ago. Was it a couple months ago?
Yeah, a couple months ago, right?
Yeah. And my husband and I went, and it was really, I took away so many just like little ahas. I think I loved it because you break it to like the how and the why, like understanding our brains and our bodies and why the addiction happens and how it happens. And then offered a lot of education, not only for parents, but also for the youth that were there. And so I wanted him to come on today to do the same type of thing and to teach us some things. So, Jason, I'll let you go ahead and maybe introduce yourself a little more.
Well, thanks. That was a kind introduction. Yeah, I earned my PhD in endocrine physiology, and I've served in a variety of church callings, especially through bishops. I've had 2 stints. I got caught in that bishop trap, and it just caused me to automatically realize, yikes, I gotta gear up on this weakness element and why people struggle through this. And so I've just been ever since then studying, processing, trying to build things that will help people understand so that they can manage the weakness.
Yeah.
And I feel like I've made some progress. I was in this, I call it the Jello belt, which it goes from Rexburg, Idaho down to St. George. And I was in that I-15 Jello belt fireside speaking circuit. And I was giving lots of firesides on addiction, and people were excited and they were clapping, and it was like a preacher party and revivalry, and then at the end I started realizing that I'm not doing any good. People are liking it, they feel inspired, and then they go right out and they get caught in the same trap. And that hit me really hard when I went to Boise. They asked me to be the keynote speaker at an ARP meeting. And as I sat there looking at it, all these people expecting me to teach them how to overcome their addiction, I just had this overwhelming sense, and I realized that science is super inadequate and that I actually can't help them. And I was teaching the wrong way. I knew it. I knew I was teaching it the wrong way. So
Interesting.
after that experience, I just said, I'm done. I just stopped accepting firesides for a while, for about
Yeah.
a year and a half. And I went to work reading the literature and studying and processing. And then I found, I found the light. I realized, oh, I've been teaching the wrong thing. So I built a new paradigm. I wrote a section in my new textbook on it. I built a PowerPoint, and I said, okay, I'm ready. And I'm not joking. That day, I got a phone call from a bishop that said, hey, will you come speak at our board on a fireside?
Really?
And then I got a phone call from another bishop. And then you emailed me. I'm like, what is going on? Maybe I do. So I'm kind of excited to present this new element of what I call managing weakness. And then you can maybe, if I get 20 minutes of just me kind of boring you, then we can open it up to some questions. I think it'll give us a nice baseline for people to use
Yeah,
and process and help them.
I think that's great. I would love that. That's great. Thank you. So let us have it.
So I'm going to share my screen
Okay.
and tell me that you're looking at the right
Yep.
thing.
Yep.
You should have a person sitting there looking at a bunch of gray squares.
Yep. I see it.
Okay. So it's going to be a little awkward on the Zoom because I have 2 screens and I've got to talk away from you while I'm looking at the
It's
right,
okay. I'm
but
going to
it's
be
my
looking
better
at your
side.
screen. So,
It's my better side anyways. Okay, so let's talk about managing weakness and addiction. You have here a picture of this fella sitting there with a thought bubble. And the thought bubble, he has some emotions. I just listed a couple: rejection, lonely, anxiety, sad, anger. The thing with guys, especially with dudes, we don't process emotions well.
Uh-huh.
We're taught to not process emotions. We don't show emotions. So the problem is we grow up with two emotions. We are either happy or we are angry.
Uh,
But we
so,
actually feel, right? We actually feel all these emotions. We feel lonely, we feel rejection, we feel anxiety, but we don't know what they are. Now, girls tend to know that they're feeling different emotions, but they have the same issue. They don't know what to do with them.
mhm.
So I'm going to take away some of these dots over here. You'll notice on the bottom here, it says idle time. If you're in idle time, this thought bubble, it just starts to ruminate and really kind of cause problems. Now, if you don't know what it is, what you do is you look over here to your left and you've got a door that says relief. It's like, and it works. It's a relief door, and you can go in this door and you can do it for one of four things. And I like to use the word dots as an analogy because it helps you remember. You could go in this door to get relief from these emotions that you're not understanding, and you could do it for distraction. You could look at video games, you could look at social media, you could doom scroll, you can go to the gym, and you can distract yourself from this emotion.
Uh-huh.
You could also opt out. Let's say you're having an emotion that's anxiety because of a ward party. And you're like, ugh, you don't understand the emotion. So you choose to not go. And that gives you relief. You can also get paralyzed by just thinking, rationalizing, fantasizing, over analyzing. And that gives you some kind of relief because it gives you some control over things that you normally can't control.
Yeah.
And finally, you can go in there and partake of substances like drugs, alcohol, anything you can to find relief. The problem is in the relief room, there's a cycle that you enter. We'll start here with dwelling. You dwell, you start to perform your rituals. We all know what they are. You justify your behavior, then you give in and partake of whatever you're in that room for. Then you have regret, then you feel shame, then you start to dwell and you have rituals, and then you justify. And this room is just, it's not a fun room. You'll see this guy down in the corner, just hands on his face, just saying, I hate this room. And in this room, you're acted upon. This is where I made an error when I was talking about addictions. I would go into a room full of people and I would tell them how bad the room was. And I would tell them that it's going to wreck their marriages and it's going to wreck their brains. And I just reinforced the fact that this is a bad place. And so everybody would say, okay, don't go in the room, don't go in the room, don't go in the room. But then they would leave from my fireside, all motivated, and go in
Mhm.
the room.
Yeah.
And I was like, what in the world? I told you not to go in there. So I started realizing that there's something wrong here, that we can't help anybody if they don't know why they're going in the room.
Yeah.
So I was, and most of us in my area, we were focusing in on why this is room. Now, heaven forbid you go in this room for pornography,
Mhm.
because if you go in there as a boy and you're like, oh, I went in the room for pornography, we destroy you. You can go in
Yeah.
the room and play video games and we'll still love you. You can go in the room and you can even smoke and drink, we'll still love you. Marijuana, we'll still love you. Go in there and doom scroll, we'll still love you. You go in there for pornography and you come out, we're going to shame you right back in there.
Yeah.
So really weird cultural elements. So the poor guy or girl going in there for that option, they're not getting out.
Mhm.
Now the
Well, and I
exit,
think about in our church, in our culture, like it's not okay to go, we were told not to drink, smoke. So
right?
everything about our stuff is food. So overeating and,
Oh yeah.
dabbling in all of that. We all enter that room somehow.
And I'm glad you saw that so quick because that's the terminology I want to give to people. Instead of saying you looked at pornography, no, no, no. You just say you went into the room and then you ask the second question, well, what emotion were you struggling with? And because that's the thing we're missing. When I
Yeah.
talk to these boys all the time, they're like, oh, you ask them essentially, why did you look at pornography? And another way of saying that's why did you go in the room? And they're like, I don't know, I hate it. Well,
Hmm.
that's false. They actually like it. You go in the room because you like the element and it gives you a sense of relief.
Yeah.
I don't like watermelon flavored Jolly Ranchers ever. I never put them things in my mouth.
Hmm.
So they're not giving me relief, but the room gives you relief. And we have to accept that the person's going into the room for relief. from an emotion that they don't know how to process. They're not a pervert. They're not a sex addict. They're just trying to seek relief from an emotion that they don't know how to process.
I love that. Yeah.
Right?
It normalizes it
Addiction.
for all of us because we all
Right.
have that.
Yeah, I mean, just lucky you. If you go in the room to watch football, but you're still distracting yourself, you're still in the room, and the room represents essentially moving you further away from your goals.
Uh-huh.
I don't like to look at it as addiction or anything like that. It's just simply if you go into the room, then you've chosen to not move towards your goals. So to get out of the room, you can use the acronym of ACE, which is essentially you got to acknowledge, oh, I'm in the room. And then you've got to connect with yourself because when you're in the room, you don't connect. You've forgotten about everything.
Yeah.
There are no consequences in the room. There is only the room. So you've got to acknowledge I'm in the room. Oh, I got to connect with something and then engage and get yourself out. But you'll notice on this other side, there's two elements to help people manage weakness. Number one, I identified as this idea of recognizing emotion correctly, processing it, not throwing it out for relief, but just accepting that I feel lonely. I feel lonely. This is an emotion I'm feeling. And why am I feeling lonely? And just analyzing it instead of going for relief.
Yeah.
But the other part of life is this element of acting. You'll notice I have in parentheses acted upon and acting. Acting are deliberate things that everybody needs to be doing on a daily basis. You've got to socialize, you've got to create, you've got to study, exercise, hobby, plan, build. But the problem is, like exercising is neither good nor bad.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going to exercise to the gym because you want to avoid looking at pornography, that's a distraction and you're actually putting yourself in the room. But if you go to exercise because it's healthy and it's part of your value system, then it makes it good.
Yeah.
So going to exercise is neither bad nor good, but the reason behind it is so crucial. And that's the element we were missing. I would tell guys all the time, well, just go to the gym, then you won't think about pornography. And by me saying that to distract them actually puts them in the room and they would struggle with pornography. And I was like, oh, I keep hurting people. So now I don't tell them. I said, no, 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 don't distract. Just acknowledge that you're lonely or you're feeling rejected and then go do your value system. So you'll notice I have these platforms like self-love. You gotta do things that make you feel good about yourself and love yourself because then you can go up these other stairs and love others. And it takes a degree of humility, but your life needs to be full of deliberate actions so that you don't have to use the relief room.
Mm,
So these guys and girls that are struggling going into the room for pornography, they don't have usually a problem on their mission because what's the mission full of? Deliberate daily actions.
yeah.
Then they come home and they're like, oh, I keep going in the room. I don't understand this emotion. I'm looking for relief. And they keep going, but they're not addicts. Like we always say, if you go in the room to look at pornography, you're an addict. No, you're not an addict. You're actually not different than someone going into the room to play video games or
Yeah.
distract themselves. There's no difference there. And we need to understand that as a person and people and to love people. Like, look, don't worry about what people do in the room. When they come out of the room, then you say, okay, let's look at your emotion. Let's go back and see what emotion you were having trouble processing and why you felt you had to go in the room.
Mm-hmm.
But our current models are always talking about don't go in the room. That room is so dumb, it breaks you. Don't go in the room. And we
Yeah.
never tell them how to not go in the room. So
Ooh, I love that.
that's my quick spiel on this idea of just talking about weakness. Now I think we can talk about any direction you want to go and add some elements.
Yeah. Well, I love that you've got that deliberate, right? Because that's where our agency lies. But then
Mm,
in the room, when we're acted upon, we lose that sense of agency.
yeah, perfect. Perfect. So the examples, like I just like I have this conversation a lot at the university. Kids will trust me, and it usually goes something like this. A girl comes in because her husband went to the room to look at pornography.
Uh-huh.
Surprised her. She can't study anymore. She's failing her classes. So I sit down with her and say, okay, Well, and I explain this element. I say, why did your husband go in the room? And she says, because I'm not good enough. I'm not attractive enough. And I say,
Interesting.
okay, you're actually in the room. She said, what? Yes, because that's not why your husband went into the room. Because pornography has nothing to do with you. He went into the room to find relief. What emotion is your husband feeling that he doesn't know how to process? And so we want to help them untie that element from them. They think that he's going into the room because they're inadequate. What a horrible way to live your life. And it just
Yeah.
wrecked. So I say, no, 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 it's not connected at all to you. Your husband's going in the room because he's seeking relief from an emotion. So as we get talking, a lot of times the girls will say, oh, well, he hates his work. I'm like, oh, he hates his work. Does he feel valuable? Oh, no, no. He feels so invaluable. Okay, so this is an emotion your husband doesn't know how to process, which is essentially feeling rejected and not valuable. He doesn't know how to process that emotion, so he's seeking relief going to the room. Usually, when I say that, they can relax and say, oh, this is not my problem.
Yeah.
No.
No. Well, and the
So, how
thing
do
that
I
she
help?
was saying, I'm not good enough, is the exact thing he was feeling, that he wasn't good
Oh,
enough and adequate in his work.
you found it. Yeah. Yep. So, that's what we've got to do. So, we need to look at him and say, all right, well, let's talk about this emotion. Are you feeling that you're not valuable? Well, oh, yes. So, teaching men, especially how to process an emotion, is crucial to helping them. And teaching a woman what to do with that emotion is crucial to helping. Because the female species is better at processing emotions. We all know that. That's like, you don't even need to be a scientist for that. But we both have the same issues. We don't know what to do with that emotion. It's
Yeah.
like this little goblin in our hands. We're like, okay, I looked at this goblin. It's scary. So whoop, I'm chucking it and I'm going for relief. And I always say,
So,
no, no, keep it, look at it, process it.
yeah, I was going to ask, because you're a man, how have you taught men how to process an emotion, being that they're not taught? None of us are taught that. I feel like this is something we should teach in grade school to
Oh, grade
every.
school.
Yeah, but we're all conditioned based on how we were raised and everything else and culture. So how do you approach that with men that come into your office?
I usually use a story. Like for me, my biggest emotion crusher in life is basketball. So I love playing basketball. I'm very active. And sometimes, for some reason, like every 2 or 3 months, I'll lose my temper and revert to 12. And my best friends, I'll say horrible things to, and I'll whine and cry and yell and scream. And I'm like, and then afterwards, I just feel terrible. So I've gone into the room, right? I'm like, good gracious. So I said, I don't like my behavior. That I don't like me going into the room with this emotion. So I had to say, what emotion am I feeling? I'm a guy, so I said, well, I'm angry because I lost. So I said, okay, let's analyze that and see if that's the emotion. So I started paying attention to my emotions. And when I started feeling that anger come, I took note of my environment and said, wait a minute, I lost, but I'm not mad. Hmm. I actually shot the ball really well. The other team played better. We lost. I'm not angry. And I came to a conclusion. I thought, wait a minute, I'm not a sore loser. What is it? So
Uh-huh.
I just kept paying attention. And eventually what I found is it's 3 shots. If I miss my first shot, I'm not angry. Everybody misses. If I miss my second shot, I'm a little irritated. But if I miss my third shot, I'm compromised. I'm
Okay.
completely compromised. In my mind, I now know I am feeling like I've let my team down and I'm no longer of value to them after 3 shots. Now you can say, well, that's dumb, but that's me. I can't undo that. For some reason, I have given myself grace up to shot 3, then I'm out.
Yeah.
So what I do next determines whether I'm going to revert to 12 or whether I'm going to be a nice, fun, good sportsman. So I don't shoot the ball. Before I knew my emotions, I would try to shoot number 4, to get myself back in line. And if I missed, it was over. I'm in the room and watch out.
And the tension's already hot anyway.
Oh,
You're
yeah.
already anxious, so it's not going to go in.
Right. So by me just paying attention and being aware of my environment and noticing my emotion, which means I'm noticing my heart rate elevating, I notice my breathing rate, I'm sensing like, wow, something's going on with me. So I'm irritated. Okay, what's happening? Once I did that, now I've got complete control over my temper. I rarely lose it. And the only time I lose it is if I do that 3-shot rule and I shoot fourth and miss. And if I just go 3 shots and then say, well, I'm going to pass a couple of series, I'm not going to shoot it. I'm going to do something different. I calm back down and I'm ready to restart my shooting.
Uh-huh.
But the way I discovered that was just being aware. It's really hard to teach men that way, but you have to be aware of your surroundings. And everybody can sense your heart rate increasing. You're feeling anxious. Everybody feels that, but we just don't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to say is accept that emotion for what it is. When you get up to speak in church and you start to shake or your hands sweat, you can ignore that emotion and opt out, or you can say, oh, look at that. My nervous system is activated because it thinks this is a fearful situation. That's good. Actually, my mind's going to be more active and I'm going to be ready to speak. And you just have to learn to be aware of what you're feeling.
Yeah. I think one of those things is paying attention to how your body feels. I think there's so many of us that have disassociated from our body and like listening to it and understanding what that feels like. And that comes with practice as well. Like
Oh, yeah.
I know when I'm tense in my chest, I'm stressed about something, my shoulders in
Right.
my chest. And, but that comes with letting your mind take a minute and pay attention to how your body feels.
So now you should accept that. And yeah, accept that. Say, okay, I'm having stress.
Yeah.
And that stress is okay because it's just a natural process.
It's what's supposed to happen. It's just a biological process, but then we don't know what to do with it. And that's where we run into our reactive behavior.
Right. And so there's two elements to this. So when you're a couple who are married, so ideally the man or the woman, they want to be able to come in contact like that, saying, I'm feeling tense in my chest, like you mentioned, my breathing rate's elevated. I'm having an emotion here. So that's step one. But step two is you've got to have an environment open enough to share that emotion. And that's where we're also failing.
Yeah.
So if I'm not comfortable telling my wife, like, hey, I feel rejection, she could erupt and say, well, what do you mean? I've done all this and this and this. Now she does that once to me and I'm not safe anymore. So I'm not going to tell her that emotion. I'm going to keep it closed. I'm going to bury it and I'm going to go find relief.
Yeah.
So I'm not blaming a wife, of course, for putting the guy in the room. I'm just blaming the guy for not being able to express the emotion. But if it's not a safe place, he can't express it. And same with her. If she goes to express an emotion and he gets offended or shuts her down, the same problem. So then she goes to the room and says, well, instead of talking this out, I'm going to just scroll. I'm just
Yeah.
going to doom scroll.
So how do you, because like we've all done this. We've all been on the giving and the receiving end of this situation. How do you repair that going back? Do you say, I'm sorry, I was being insensitive and didn't hear you. Tell me more. How do you repair that to again regain trust and safety?
Yeah. That's where I'm hoping that we can introduce a terminology like the room and we can talk about this. So the best way to teach these is use examples. So my best friend here on campus, he and I work on this. He's a bishop now. And we've been kind of mulling this around, but we're also exact opposites. And I drive him crazy sometimes, and he drives me crazy. But we have a
That's what you're
terminology
supposed to
now.
do.
I know. So we're very opposite, but we're very good team members together. And so he'll sometimes say, I'm in the room. I'm in the room. And that I recognize, okay, he's not going to, he says, I'm going to say mean things. I'm in the room. I've got to talk to you later.
I love
Right?
that.
So introducing terminology rather than this and that, he's just like, I'm not in a good state right now. I'm just not prepared. And I think a husband and wife or a child and parent or a friendship, whatever relationship gets strained, if you can introduce some terminology that's a little bit softer. So especially a husband and wife, let's say the husband went in to look at pornography, he could say, I made a mistake and I looked at pornography. That's going to be hit her really emotional. That's like punching her in the face. And he might lie because he doesn't want to do that. But if
Yeah.
he just says, I had an emotion, I didn't process it well. Now she knows he went into the room,
Uh-huh.
but she doesn't have to feel that emotion. She's like, okay, let's back up and talk about this emotion. Can you tell me what emotion you were feeling? And man, that's a beautiful experience.
Yeah.
You can
Yeah.
always repair that, but you've got to be sensitive to that element. Before we just, wow, why'd you go in the room? Golly, you're such a pervert. Oh, why do you do that? And we just talk about the room, the room, the room. The room is, it's not a fun place. It's a weakness. Why do we have to keep hashing? Because when we do, we add shame, and then guess where we end up? Back in the room.
Yeah.
We got to take a step back and just talk about the emotion. And when I've done this in my office with these guys, they're like, what? I want to tell you what I did. I'm like, no, I don't care what you did. You went into the room. Got it. Why'd you go in the room? I don't know. Okay, what emotion were you feeling? Well, I was bored. No, that's not an emotion. Where were you? What were you feeling? And it's such a fun conversation because eventually the guy will say, well, okay, I was home alone. My roommates were out. I was lonely. I felt lonely. I was scrolling through Facebook. I saw the relationships of my friends. I felt bad. I don't have a girlfriend. I didn't like that emotion, so I went into the room to find relief. And then I can say, awesome, did you find relief? No,
Mm.
actually felt more lonely. Okay, so you were feeling lonely, you went in the room. And now we say, let's turn to this other side with these stairs. What is it that you value? Tell me what you value. And one kid says, why, I hate to say this, but I like money. So, oh, okay, that's fine. You value money. So is going in the room taking you closer to money or further away? Says, oh, it's taking me away. Okay, so what kind of things can you implement in your life that will take you closer to your value systems? And we just kind of stop talking about the room, but instead build up what they want to be. So the room represents this area then that takes you away from what you value. So the discussions need to change. Instead of beating up these kids that go in the room or girls, we just say, look, let's build a stronger value system. Let's help you process emotion. And the room goes away.
Yeah. A lot easier than I think they probably would have guessed. Have
Right.
you had any conversations? I'm sure you have after the fact. Does that make sense? Like, okay, you talked about the room with them and then they got a chance to go and practice it on their own. Have you had those conversations like, oh my gosh, you'll never believe what happened?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I just got an email today from a girl that they were married, and I think I can share this, so I won't use any names, but he was struggling with the room. He kept going in the room, and our first conversation, she was so mad at him and so disgusted. And I said, look, what if he was going in the room to smoke? Well, I would love him. Okay, what if he was going in the room to drink? Well, I would still love him.
Yeah.
Marijuana, I'd still love him. Video games, I would love him. I said, so he's going in the room for pornography and you don't love him anymore. And we just kind of backed, and she's like, it was so liberating. She says, I realized, oh, why am I, oh, and she just said, I got to help him with his emotion. And she just sent me an email today saying that she's so grateful that they had this great conversation last night about his stress towards a particular element in his life.
Mm-hmm.
He cried the first time she'd ever seen him cry, like voluntarily.
Uh-huh.
And he didn't have to go seek relief because he embraced that emotion and understood it for what it was. And she says it was liberating. She didn't feel attacked. She didn't feel like she was forcing him into the room or that she was inadequate. She just realized my husband is having this hard emotion that he's not processing properly. Maybe I can help him understand that emotion. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. 100%. That's awesome. So
You know,
good. That is amazing. So when we did the fireside, we talked about, I think there was a question from one of the youth. You had talked about how to help ourselves, um, like strengthen that part of ourselves that is more deliberate and
Yeah.
able to make decisions and have more agency rather than getting into the room so often and frequently. And your answer, I was like, oh my gosh, that is perfect. Do you remember what she said and
Yeah.
what your answer to that?
Yeah. I wish we could have had this terminology. I
Yeah.
just I discovered this a little bit too late. Like, but
Well, this
she's
is
asking
awesome.
how, yeah, because deliberate action is comes from the prefrontal cortex, that front part of your brain. That's what gives us agency. As humans, we have a very large prefrontal cortex. So the idea of deliberate action is to strengthen the prefrontal cortex. And that's actually, it's an unselfish area of your brain. Most of your brain is developed to be selfish. Protect yourself. If you're cold, get warm. If you're hungry, eat. And that's most of our brain, really. Blood pressure regulation, heart rate, breathing. But then we have this really interesting front part, which allows us to be unselfish. Like you could be starving and you could turn and see someone else who's starving and actually choose to give your food or a portion of that food to someone else. Like,
Yeah.
it's unheard of. But that's what the human species can do. And that ability to override the majority of your brain that's designed to be selfish is in your prefrontal cortex. So to strengthen the prefrontal cortex, it's the gospel of Jesus Christ, because there's nothing selfish about the gospel. It's amazing.
Yeah, nothing.
It's like Heavenly Father would say, well, I'd love to talk to you about oxytocin release, and I'd love to talk to you about these hormones of serotonin, different things in your brain, your prefrontal cortex, but that's going to take years of schooling. How about this? You live the gospel according to your covenants, and it will strengthen your prefrontal cortex. So things like give money away, selflessly serve, go to the temple and serve other people, not yourself.
Hmm.
Go to church, don't get paid for serving. Give fast offerings, which is an addition to tithing. Give more money away.
Yes.
All these things are designed to really strengthen your prefrontal cortex and help you develop a value system that will make you deliberate. So I'm always a proponent of reading your scriptures daily, not because you're trying to distract yourself from the world, but because you want to spend time with Heavenly Father. So that's a deliberate thing. And then, of course, pray, because not because you're trying to avoid temptation or because you're scared of God being angry at you, but because you love God and you're going to give him an opportunity to communicate, because that will help you serve others and express gratitude, deliberate actions. I'm going to exercise because exercising will keep me healthy so that I can serve other people. And it's this transition of selflessness that powers the prefrontal cortex. And the stronger that becomes, the less likely you are to need to seek relief in the room.
Hmm. Very interesting. You know, you hear, and I know probably we're all guilty of sometimes complaining or being upset with the demands of serving in the church and, calling. Some callings take several hours and time away and all of that. Um, but it always seems to come back, and I always look back and think there's a reason after learning things like this. It is to help ourselves out. All these things that
Oh,
we're
yeah.
asked, all these things that we're told, hey, do these things. It is not a checklist so you can get into heaven. It's for our own good.
And you've nailed that right. In fact, all vulnerability, up front. The only time I have issues in my marriage, my wife and I not getting along, I pinpoint it to me being selfish. Like, it's every time. Like, I do my emotion. I might feel I'm feeling rejected. Like she's ignoring me, and or whatever it is. I'm being selfish. And when I take a step back and be like, oh man, I'm being selfish, and I reverse that to being unselfish, it resolves. It's amazing. Because when I'm being selfish, I look at her and say, I just point like, you're being so selfish. and it's just brutal. It's me.
Yeah.
Every time. It's so frustrating. And same with the church, because I often talk about giving versus gaining. If you go to the church to gain, you're probably not going to get very much. I mean, we've all gone to church. We've heard every talk you could imagine. It's rarely that I go to a sacrament meeting and I'm like, wow, that talk changed my life.
Mhm.
Maybe every once in a while, or that lesson, I didn't know that. It's rare. It's like you get a few gold nuggets. So if I'm going to church to gain, I'm not going to be very happy. But if I recognize I go to church to give, who can I sit by today? What lesson can I contribute to maybe help someone else? Who's in more need than myself? All of a sudden, church becomes this wonderful joy of giving. I'm not going to gain. I'm going to see with my talents and abilities the Lord has blessed me with, who can I give to today? That's a prefrontal cortex that's just on fire. And you don't need a room of relief because
Yeah.
your value systems are constantly being met. It's just an amazing experience.
So how do you teach that to your own kids? How have you taught that to your own kids? Because we're going through that, with like mutual, we're not doing anything fun, or and we've gone through this before. It's not about the fun; it's who might need you there.
I know, and I wish I could tell you that I was super good at that.
It's so hard.
Oh, yeah, it's just hard. And I think what you do is you just try to teach by example. I mean, I don't know. I can't every time somebody asks me, well, how do I do it with my kids? I automatically feel hypocritical because I'm with everybody else. I'm struggling.
Yeah,
It's but I think I would only offer like, don't quit. So oftentimes when you teach youth, it's like the hardest calling in church is teaching Sunday school to like 16-year-olds because
yes.
you feel like a failure every time. But if you think back on your 16-year-old self and you say, what lesson could you remember? There's always one or two.
100%.
And that lesson changed my life. And it was because that teacher didn't quit. And the same thing with my parents. You ask my parents, who I thought were amazing. They're like, oh, we were terrible. He was our first, and we messed him up bad. But in reality, their efforts, they didn't quit. And I think that's the advice I would give is you just don't quit when you want to quit. It doesn't take much. Just don't quit. And the little efforts will result in big results in the end. Just recognizing it's about giving. Mutual's boring, so find someone to love.
No, so good. So good. And it goes for all of us. I could think of the meetings and the extra activities and all those things I don't want to go to, and same thing. It's not about me. It's about going to see who might need a lift that day.
Yeah. And if you go there, it's amazing how much you gain, ironically.
Always, always. The hardest part's getting there.
Yeah. To gain, you get nothing. If you go to give, you gain. It's a weird equation.
Yes. Well, this is amazing. Did you do your artwork or in your graphics? Did you do that?
Oh, I had AI systems build this for me.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, for the podcast listeners, I'm going to post the video as well. And then can you send like a PDF
Oh
or
yeah.
a
Yeah.
digital image so I can post that as well? Because
Yeah.
it is so good, and it really helps make sense of the room and the deliberate actions and the stairs and relief and all of it.
I just like to, we just need to move away from the word addiction. Addiction's a word reserved for the very worst.
Yeah,
Use it too liberally, too freely. We say, oh, my husband's a porn addict because he looked at pornography. He went to the room twice this month. That's not an addict. That's a good man doing good things who had a bad emotion process and went to the room. We
I
just
love
have
it.
to change our narrative so that we stop hurting boys and girls who go in the room because they don't understand an emotion. So I've got a PDF and I've got a little write-up associated with it I'll send, and it's non-proprietary. So if it will help somebody, zip it around. I'm not in for credit. I'm in for giving and trying to help individuals overcome weakness.
Well, Thank you, because I've got a list of people I'm like, oh my word, they need this so bad.
Awesome.
Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you would like to just close with or touch on before we end?
I do have a favorite scripture when I talk about hard subjects like this that I want to use because I love it. It's you don't have to look it up. I have it somewhat memorized. I'll paraphrase a little bit, but it starts in Mosiah chapter 2, verse 28. In Mosiah chapter 2, verse 28, it's talking about these boys. They're the prophet's son, Alma, and the king's sons. So Mosiah is the king. He's got sons named Ammon, Omner, Limhi, and they're friends with Alma, who's the prophet's son. It's like the bishop's kids and the stake president kids, and they're together, these boys, and they're doing bad things.
They're getting
They
into
keep
trouble.
going into the room, right? They go into the room. And I think Mosiah 2:28 tells them, it says, for they were the most vile of sinners.
Hmm.
So these boys were going into the room and not doing good things. Well, we know what happens, but they eventually go on missions. They come back, and then Alma chapter 48, verse 17 has this really neat verse that says, behold, if all men were unto like Moroni, the very powers of hell would be shaken forever. Because Moroni, and you're like, oh man, I don't compare to Moroni. He didn't ever go in the room. But the next verse, Alma 48:18 says, for behold, he was a man like unto Alma and Ammon, yea, all the sons of King Mosiah, these same boys who were vilest of all sinners in Mosiah, have become the epitome of Captain Moroni. And it says at the end of 18, for they were all men of God. So please don't look at a boy or a girl who's going into the room and quit on them. It's the room. It's not the person. The person is good. They have goodness. God loves them. They have so much potential. It's they don't know how to process an emotion and they're seeking for that relief. And when we view people that way, we're a lot kinder and we're more apt to step in and say, can I help you process this emotion? Instead of focusing in on the room and the vileness, let's focus on men of God.
Amen. I love it. That is so good. Thank you. I've never put that together, those scriptures. I'm going to go back and read those and study those more. That is perfect.
Awesome.
Well, thank you again. I so appreciate your time. I know you're a busy guy, and this has been so helpful, and I know it will help so many. So thank you.
I hope so. Thank you.